Okay, this is Gerald Belsky with the International Peace Coalition and the um, Schiller Institute, and also the Executive Intelligence Review. But I have as my guest here Gershon Baskin, who's been a noted peace negotiator, promoter of the two-state solution for many decades. He was an associate of the late Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin in promoting peace, and more recently, he has played a critical role in negotiating with Hamas and the United States for this current peace process, as tenuous as it is. But I'd like to ask you, Gershon, where you see the process going, where it needs to go, and how to get there.
I think the starting point is really recognizing the importance of ending the war in Gaza. And the war in Gaza has ended. And it ended because President Donald Trump forced the end of the war on the Israeli Prime Minister. This would not have happened without Trump intervening and insisting that the war end. It happened because after the failed Israeli attempt to assassinate the Hamas leadership in Doha, Qatar, the Arab partners of Trump in Qatar, in Saudi Arabia, and in the United Arab Emirates told Trump that Israel is unhinged, Netanyahu is a wild man, and he endangers the security of the entire region. And if you want to know what Donald Trump is thinking, follow the money. The interest of Trump, the Trump family, and I would say the national interest of the United States are definitely in the Arab Gulf, in these countries and other countries, and not just in the state of Israel, as might have been perceived by prior American administrations. So this is a direct result of the failed Israeli assassination attempt in Doha, the violation of the sovereign territory of the state of Qatar, and the close relations between Trump and the Emir and the Prime Minister of Qatar, and of course the direct involvement of Steve Witkoff, who was the deal maker behind the scenes. But it was ultimately Trump's decision. Now, that was the first stage. But in order to get there, and in order to impose this not only on Israel, but on Hamas, Trump came up with his what's now the 20-point plan, and he incorporated the 20-point plan in an agreement that was made with the Arab and Muslim countries and European countries, and then was incorporated within the negotiations that the Americans conducted directly through the Qataris, the Egyptians, and the Turks, and in the final moment, a direct meeting between the American negotiators and the Hamas leadership. This is unprecedented. What it led to was something that almost everyone in Israel, except me and a few others, said would never happen, that Hamas returned all the living hostages. And there are, out of 28 deceased hostages, 4 that are left and are still being searched for. And Hamas is making efforts together with the International Red Cross, the Turks, and the Egyptians, to find the remaining 4 hostages. And the war has ended. Israel has withdrawn to agreed upon positions, but it is a temporary withdrawal to those positions. Israel will be forced to withdraw further back. There are a lot of moving pieces that need to be done simultaneously, urgently, like the formation of a new technocratic Palestinian government committee, the creation of a Palestinian security force, which is not Hamas, the deployment of an international security force in Gaza, which is waiting for a United Nations Security Council mandate. The third or fourth or fifth draft of that Security Council resolution is circulating amongst the members of the Security Council. There have been changes made to the draft. The Trump 20-point plan has been incorporated as an annex in the proposed resolution. The Americans set up a civilian military command center in the town of Kiryat Gat, not far from Gaza. They're talking about setting up a large military base adjacent to Gaza. The Americans have taken over the issue of humanitarian aid, which should stop all the Israeli obstacles that have been placed on humanitarian aid, because less than a third of what was supposed to go into Gaza since the ceasefire a month now has gone into Gaza, and the Americans want to move this process along. There are difficulties, there are obstacles. There's a crisis right now with between 100 and 200 Hamas fighters in a tunnel underneath the area that Israel controls. Hamas delivered the remains of the soldier Hadar Goldin, who was killed in Gaza in 2014, and they understood that a deal would be made that would enable the Hamas fighters in the tunnel to leave, perhaps leaving their weapons behind, but Israel is opposed to this. And the Americans are trying to work at a deal that will enable them to leave the tunnel, whether they leave Gaza or stay in Gaza. This is being negotiated. The next stages of the deal are in the works. The Americans are in a constant movement of what we're now calling BB sitting, from Donald Trump to the vice president to the secretary of state to four-star generals coming here, to Jared Kushner being here yesterday, Witkoff coming in and out, and other American officials are making sure that Israel holds to the ceasefire, even though Israel violates the ceasefire every day. Hamas has violated the ceasefire, and the Americans are working with the Turks, the Egyptians, and the Qataris to make sure that this ceasefire holds and that we move into the future forward stages, which will hopefully lead to a regional peace process involving the creating of an architecture for regional security and regional economic development and prosperity. The bottom line here is that everyone here has to understand that Israel will never have security until the Palestinians have freedom. The Palestinians will never have freedom until Israel has security. And I think this is understood by the US administration, as opposed to the first Trump administration, where he put down his deal of the century that included a kind of a Palestinian state minus 30% of the territory of the West Bank with zero sovereignty and zero control of their borders. I think there's a much better understanding amongst the Trump personnel today, and perhaps Trump himself, that Palestinians need to have a state at the end of this process, and that state can only provide Israel with security if it's part of a regional package.
Okay. Gershon, you have written in your Substack posts that what is lacking right now between the two parties is empathy for each other, and that in order to get a permanent peace, there must be a recognition of the rights of both nations to exist. Now, what you're calling for is essentially what was discovered in the Treaty of Westphalia in Europe in the religious wars, that there was a recognition that a continuation of this war would destroy everybody. And they promoted and put into international law the concept of the interest of the other, which is a key concept to have peace, obviously. Now, you have also written that paradoxically, the distrust of both sides is greater than ever before, and that both sides think the other is guilty of massive crimes and there could be no recognition. Now, the question is how to overcome that divide. And as you may know, the Schiller Institute has been saying for many years, and Mr. LaRouche had insisted when he put forward his Oasis Plan, that to overcome this distrust and lack of empathy, lack of recognition of a joint shared future, there has to be economic development to create the future. There has to be hope for the future. Now, you have written about this. I did not realize this till a few days ago, 2 years ago, that there must be economic development to create the basis for future, because you cannot have peace if the Palestinians are kept in abject poverty with no hope. So there must be built into this peace process the idea of hope. And therefore, as you know, we are proposing bring in massive water. And you have yourself said it can't just be a bilateral agreement. This has to be a region-wide. Mm-hmm. Bring in the Saudis, Qataris, Turkey, etc. And therefore, to have this massive project of development, which you in fact insist, and I think you're absolutely correct, bring in the Chinese. They have expertise and a track record of building infrastructure. Would you like to comment on this economic side of the peace process?
Sure. I've been doing this work since 1988. It's a long time. The first actual piece of research that we produced in this joint Israeli-Palestinian public policy think tank called IPCRI, the Israel-Palestine Center for Research and Information, was a book written by two economic business people, and it was published in 1989, and it was called Peace Pays. And it was the first piece of research, a policy paper that we put out, recognizing that people had to see the benefits of making peace. It couldn't be some abstract kind of idea, but it had to have a direct impact on their lives. And this is still the case. I have said to Israeli audiences for decades that it makes no sense whatsoever for us as Israelis to want to have poor neighbors. Palestinian poverty is not good for Israel. Palestinian poverty are unhappy neighbors, and we should want to have happy neighbors. And because Israel has actually become an economic giant, it makes no sense that Israel puts obstacles on Palestinian economic development. If the war in Gaza ends with the economic blockade remaining intact in Gaza, we will have achieved nothing and nothing will change. Gaza needs to be opened up, Gaza needs to be developed. The one tiny little positive thing that one can say about the total destruction of Gaza is that you don't rebuild refugee camps. Gaza needs to be built in a way that provides people with decent housing, with a good life, with open spaces, with planned public transportation and infrastructure of water and electricity and sanitation. People don't have to live with open sewage pits running along the streets where they enter their homes. So there is a chance that the many tens of billions of dollars that will hopefully be made available for the reconstruction of Gaza will have a direct impact on the lives of the people in Gaza. It will take time. And we're approaching winter, and there are 2 million homeless people in Gaza. The West Bank economy has been destroyed in the last 2 years as well. 200,000 Palestinians who used to work in Israel and provided for between 40 to 50% of the Palestinian economy have been unemployed for 2 years, have no wages to bring home and put food on the table. And the government of Israel owes the Palestinian Authority more than $2 billion in taxes that Israel collects on behalf of the Palestinian Authority. And the Palestinian banks have hundreds of millions of shekels in their vaults that they have nothing to do with this money because Israel, the Bank of Israel, and the government of Israel won't let the money be flowed back into Israel, so it being accredited to the Palestinian banks. There's so many economic problems here that it's so counterintuitive and counterproductive for the government of Israel to be waging policies that enhance Palestinian poverty and Palestinian suffering. This is what we need to overcome. We're not going to overcome it with the current government of Israel. And the Palestinians need to have the ability to elect new leadership as well. And this is something that's been promised to them by their 90-year-old president, who's in the 20th year of a 4-year term. So we need political leadership of a new kind. We need a new generation. We need people with vision. We need the international community to be here and buy in, not only run by the United States, and I think the United States has really good intentions, and they will successfully raise the money from the international community, much of it coming from the Arab world. But I think it would be a good step for everyone in the entire planet if the United States also cooperated with China in the reconstruction of Gaza, because simply no one in the world builds infrastructure faster and more efficiently and cheaper than the Chinese do. And I think that would really help the people of Gaza. I think it might also help lessen the tensions between the United States and China if that were to happen. I'm less confident about that happening because of the animosity between the United States and China than I am about the other things that I mentioned.
Well, the question you have posed is essentially how to get the United States to cooperate, because it's clear that by the United States taking this initiative, as Trump did, it forced the issue. And he went outside of just Israel, but he brought in other countries. Now, it's been our view of the Schiller Institute that if the United States were to reach out to China and Russia and other nations, even Iran, we could solve most of the problems we're facing if we adopted this same empathy that you see between Israel and Palestine as part of a new security and development order. And as you know, the Chinese have called this the new global governance initiative, a new security initiative, and they would be very open, along with Russia, to putting together a new order that respected the rights of every country. What you've been calling for between Israel and Palestine, essentially. Now,
see, I think it's very difficult to imagine that the United States would actually turn to China or that China would turn to Israel. we're struggling right now with the reality that both Qatar and Turkey want to play a role in Gaza, and the Israelis have so far put a veto on that. What I have suggested to the United States is that the buy-in price for Turkey to be involved in Gaza would be the renewal of full diplomatic relations between Israel and Turkey, and maybe that could happen. I would suggest that if we want to see China getting involved, that maybe the Qataris could actually be the middle guys talking to the Chinese. The Qatari emir and the prime minister of Qatar are very close to Donald Trump. And if they were to play this mediating role between Beijing and Washington, maybe that could move something. Because, Trump is a transactional president, and he sees things in a transactional way. And with the Qataris involved and all the money behind them, and the appeal to involve China in reconstruction of Gaza, maybe it could happen. I don't know about the Russians. We also have to see right now if the Russians and the Chinese threaten to veto the Security Council resolution that the United States wants to pass and would provide the mandate for the international security force in Gaza, which is essential. It's also, I would point out, unprecedented. This is something that that the Palestinian people have been calling for decades, is protection, international protection, and an international security force in Gaza made up of Arabs and Muslim countries and European countries and others is exactly the kind of protection that would prevent Israel from attacking Gaza again. So this is really in the interest of the Palestinians to see it done, and we don't want the Russians or the Chinese to veto the Security Council resolution simply because the Americans are trying to pass it.
Well, one thing you may not be aware of in terms of the Russian angle here is that the CEO of the Direct Investment Fund of Russia, Kirill Dmitriev, who is also the presidential envoy for international economic cooperation, recently came to Washington and met with Steve Witkoff on the question of Trans-Siberian economic projects, which we know that Trump has shown some interest in. And what Dmitriev has proposed is a project that the Schiller Institute has long also been promoting, which is to build a Bering Strait tunnel that would link all of North America with Eurasia. Now, if you could get those kind of cooperation development projects between the US and Russia, you would then intersect the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. So that is one direct link. But also in terms of China, Professor Zhang Weiwei, noted international relations and economic expert in China, has told us that China has tremendous experience in defeating the desert. They have one of the biggest deserts, as you know, in Northwest China, and they have been beating it back with water development and tree planting, and they have a whole process of doing this. When he looked at the Oasis Plan, he said, look, in terms of developing this water project, China could do it. We could be brought in. Do you have any comments on this type of economic cooperation? I should just add in this regard that in September, the Chinese, with the Russians and numbers of other countries, members of the BRICS, had a conference of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization where they promoted this type of new economic and security order going together. And if that could be brought in through the Qataris or whoever, this would change the whole dynamic, we think.
Well, I think it'd be great if it could happen. And the more cooperation, the better, the more projects that are actually put down on the ground. We have 2 million homeless people in Gaza. This has to be dealt with quickly. This is a human disaster that's happening in Gaza. And I think for the security of the region, the security of the world, the more cooperation that can be developed between the superpowers in the world, and that's the United States, Russia, and China, the better it is for the entire globe. It's good for everyone. It sometimes bewilders me that this kind of cooperation doesn't develop, and people are looking at very primitive conceptions of competition rather than cooperation. And it's to the cooperation where we need to get. And if the spark for that cooperation could be helping to build peace between Israel and Palestine that benefits us all.
Absolutely. Um, the irony of the situation is that President Trump is very interested in these economic development projects through the Abraham Accords. But the countries that he's counting on for doing this, which could um, create security for everybody, including Israel, um, are many of them are collaborators, if not members of the BRICS, and they collaborate with China. Egypt is a member of the BRICS. The UAE is a member of the BRICS. Iran is a member of the BRICS. And so, if any Abraham Accords that did not bring in these types of development, if they were, let me put it this way, if they were perceived as an attempt to isolate China out of the picture, stop the BRICS, and build an economic program independently, once again, competition and block, ironically, that would fail.
Yeah.
Yet, if the US got over its opposition to the BRICS, seeing it as a threat to the United States and the dollar, but see it as cooperation, I am quite certain these countries would be glad to cooperate. And they've told us with the United States, at least many of the
Right.
countries.
I think here, as I said, I think that Qatar might be the key player here because of the very close position that Qatar has with the United States, with President Trump, and its ability to work behind the scenes is something that they do. Even though the criticism of Qatar and Israel is that this is a country that supports the Muslim Brotherhood and supported Hamas for years, but um, it's a complex situation. It's a complex reality, and I think that Qatar wants to be involved in the continuation of helping Gaza without building groups like Hamas that threaten the security of the entire region. Well, I think there's a kind of awakening taking place in Qatar as well, and if they can play a positive role between the United States and China, all the power to them. They should do it.
Well, finally, I'd like to ask you in terms of the process of building for a two-state solution, um, which some people have dismissed as not going to happen. I frankly think it's the only realistic thing, which, as you know, and you've said, and other people have said, there are 7 million Israelis and 7 million Palestinians, and they're not going anywhere. They're
Right.
going to be living together. But would you like to comment in that regard on,
Sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
I would just say that those people who talk about a one-state solution have to know that there's no such thing. If you want to solve a conflict, you have to ask what it is that people have been willing to fight, to die, and to kill for. And in Israel and Palestine, it has been for a territorial expression of their identity. Israelis and Palestinians have not been fighting, killing, and dying for a United States of Israel Palestine in a territory which is not defined in an ethnic or religious sense. Israelis want a Jewish state and the Palestinians want a Palestinian state. And even those Israelis and Palestinians who might talk about a one state solution, the minute you dig below the surface and ask them to describe that state, the Palestinians describe a Palestinian state and the Israelis describe a Jewish state. So if we want to resolve the conflict, we have to answer it, what is we're fighting for. And Israelis need a territorial expression of their identity, and Palestinians need a territorial expression of their identity. But the conditions for that to happen is that we have to remove barriers and walls and fences and not build them higher. There can only be peace here if there's cooperation across the borders, and that's economic cooperation and environmental cooperation and energy cooperation and everything that you can think of, from education to research to culture to food to everything. Because we live on one small piece of land, which is a common homeland for both peoples. And even if there is a border separating sovereignty between these two states, there needs to be a recognition that the whole territory is important to all the people who are living here.
Would you like to comment on the question of Israel releasing Marwan Barghouti, who has been a long proponent for the two-state solution and is considered the most popular Palestinian leader who would probably be elected president if there were elections?
Right. Well, I advocated for Marwan Barghouti's release with the Americans when they were negotiating with Israel and Hamas on the prisoner release, and 250 Palestinian prisoners who were serving life sentences for killing Israelis were released in the last round of this deal that ended the war. I advocated for Marwan, but I think it's also important to know that I think that Marwan should be free. We don't know what Marwan's state of mind is. He's been in prison for 23 years now. He is not a young man. He's been tortured by Israel over the last 2 years, kept in solitary confinement in the dark many hours of the day, been starved and physically abused. And he's been moved at least 5 times between prisons where he gets the initiation of the prison guards. The Israeli prison authority is run today by Ben Gvir, and they take the orders from Ben Gvir, and they are treating all the Palestinian security-related prisoners in the same way. And Marwan, because he's a symbol of Palestinian struggle and Palestinian leadership, he gets extra special attention from the Israeli prison authorities. So we have no idea what his state of mind is. He should be released. He should be free to make a decision if he wants to serve the Palestinian people as a leader. Maybe he needs to recover from all the torture that he's received over these years, and maybe he's not in a position to lead. He is in no doubt the most popular Palestinian leader because he is a symbol of the Palestinian people. But being in prison for 23 years, the young generation of Palestinians don't even know who he is, know nothing about him. He's just a name. And we need to recognize it. The bottom line is that Palestinians need to have the right, must have the right to elect their own leadership. And neither you nor me nor anyone else in the world should impose upon them who their leaders are. Has to be a free choice of the Palestinian people. And if they choose to elect Marwan Barghouti, whether he's in prison or not, this is their choice.
Finally, Gershon, I just want to bring to your attention that Pope Leo XIV recently identified a principle which the Schiller Institute has been promoting also for 40 years. It's called the coincidence of opposites. And he cited a 15th century theologian, not well known, but Nicholas of Cusa, who had come up with the concept of an ecumenical alliance among different religions and different peoples based on the scientific principle that the one is greater than the many, and that you cannot resolve a problem on the same level on which it was created. You have to go to a higher truth. And this is a principle we've been promoting. And I think what we've been discussing today is an example of that principle of a higher truth. How do you reconcile two opposites on a higher level, which is this question of development for security for all? And therefore, if we apply this principle today, we could frankly transform the entire world.
Sounds like a good idea to me. I think the Americans called it e pluribus unum, from the many one.
Absolutely. And in that preamble to the Constitution, it promotes the general welfare. And if we take that principle and apply it to the whole world, we could solve everything.
I agree.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Gershon,
Thank
and
you.
for everything you've been doing.
Thank you very much.